Well, thank you all so much for coming. We're excited to have this group here. As you know, our topic tonight is the other side of the page, insight from a grant reviewer. So we're really excited to bring this topic to you. We think that it is going to be really insightful. Something that we hear a lot of times from folks is that the grant review process seems kind of shrouded in mist. No one is, quite sure exactly how it works or what grant reviewers are looking for. So we're extremely excited to have a grant reviewer here with us. So we will be chatting with Heather Shutter, who will do a little formal introduction for here in just a second. But yeah, just wanted to give that overview. There will be plenty of time for questions. We are excited to hear your questions, so start thinking about them now. What are the burning questions that you have always wanted to ask somebody who reviews grants? So there will be plenty of time to ask about those. So yeah, let's dive in. I guess, Angela, do you want to do just a brief little introduction of the Tacoma Capacity Building Project and maybe introduce yourself?
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Angela Silva with CPIN, and we are here to help roll out lots of knowledge and technical assistance to nonprofits in the city of Tacoma. And thus the Tacoma Capacity Building Project. This is sponsored by the city of Tacoma's Neighborhood and Community Services team, and also Tacoma Creates Tacoma Arts, and really focusing on supporting groups and making sure that we're including groups that are BIPOC led, newly funded organizations, and also cultural and heritage and needs serving orgs. So this program is going throughout the year, and we're really excited to teach folks a little bit more about what we know in the grant process. And thank you for being here. I am a CEO and founder of CPIN, and she, her pronouns.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. Well, I am Ariana Garfolo. I'm the senior grant writer here at Collaborative Partners Initiative. And I will be sort of co-presenting this today with Heather, our grant reviewer. Let's see, I think I switched the order of these. First, let's welcome Heather Shutter. So Heather is a former grant reviewer from the Washington Department of Commerce, which is super exciting. Heather is a licensed attorney here in Washington. She's had all kinds of really amazing experience, such as being the program coordinator at the Office of Crime Victims Advocacy at Department of Commerce. And Heather, I'll hand it over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself and say a bit about yourself as well?
Hi, all. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Ariana and I have been working together in a couple of different capacities, and we found it's really helpful to be working together when we approach a project or a grant with different lenses. And I'm really excited to chat with y'all tonight. Something I'm really passionate about is technical assistance. And yeah, I'm really happy to share some of the lessons I've learned throughout my career.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Heather. We're very excited to have you as well. Okay, so I think we'll start here. So I am just going to kind of ask Heather some questions, like some general topics, and Heather's gonna give us some insight. And so I think what would be really helpful, Heather, is, if we could start out by talking a little bit about how the grant review process is structured. I feel like this came up in a few of our comments about what people think about grant review, that maybe it should be streamlined or that there should be more transparency or that, people are not really sure, they don't really know anything about it. So can you enlighten us what is the typical process of a grant review look like, and how does that structure work?
Yeah, absolutely. I have two things to say. So one, there's a very annoying fly flying around my head. So if you see me just like periodically swatting, I'm fine. I'm just bad like an insect. So I can share a little bit about the applications that I have reviewed and some of my grant experience. So I have a background in victim service funding. So I worked a lot with domestic violence organizations, sexual assault programs, children's advocacy centers. And I've also done some grant reviewing for disability rights organization, like organizational grants. And I've reviewed a few grants for some for housing funding. And one of the things that I've learned primarily is that every application and every process for everything is absolutely different. So you might be applying for, if you apply for 3 different grants from one office, all 3 of those grants are still likely to be different, even though they are coming from the same funding organization. So one of the things that I have learned is that grant reviewers, people who are developing grant applications, grant writers, everybody welcomes questions. I've never met somebody who has said, don't ask, like, no, we've had a limit. And I think especially for new programs, in my experience working for the state, there's a really high value, I think, around wanting to connect with organizations who are new, wanting to connect with organizations who have historically been like disenfranchised. And so I think the best thing that you could do is if you're confused or if you're not sure, I would encourage you to like reach out to the application coordinator and ask for resources. And honestly, I think the response that you get might tell you a lot. It might tell you a lot about the funder, and it might tell you a lot about the organization that you're going to get money from. So if they respond to you and if they don't respond to you, I think that is information for you to use. And 2, if they do respond to you with accessible resources or like folks that you can reach out to, I think that's also like a helpful indicator of the type of relationship you might have with the funder. So I can share a little bit about some of the applications that I worked on. So when I was scoring grants, our process, again, each process was different, and usually you could ask and we would tell you what the process was. And so we would take, for like one funding application, let's say we got 50 applications. There would be 3 to 5 grant reviewers reviewing each individual application that came in. From that, we would have a like spreadsheet rubric, and we would take an average of the 3 scores. We would take an average of the 3 scores that you had received from the 3 different grant evaluators. And the reason that we took that approach was I think we were intentionally trying to keep from being like, we wanted things to be balanced. We wanted to have like a more even approach. We didn't want one person to be the decision maker or to let one person's bias determine whether or not an organization was going to get funding. And then based on that, this is the process that we used the majority of the time, is we would take an average score, like an average of the 3 reviews or scores that they got from different grant reviewers. Usually in a grant application, before you submit it, if you read the application or you read the narrative document for the grant, it will tell you if there are predetermined priority areas and like location priorities. So when I was doing work for the state, one of the things that I realized is that King County and Pierce County have a lot of service providers. And whereas like some parts of Eastern Washington can be like, they're more rural, and so they don't have as many service providers. So if there is a priority around funding the entire state, that competition in places like Pierce County and King County is going to be much higher than in some of those more rural counties. So I think Ariana and I have this on a future slide, but like that's something for you to consider when you are applying. So like if the pot of funding that you are applying for is a statewide funding initiative and there's only $500,000 available, and every applicant can apply for $100,000, that means there's only going to be 5 awards there's only going to probably be about 5 awards in the state, assuming that everybody gets the maximum amount. That means that if the goal is to fund the entire state, just divide it in half, like assume 2.5 organizations in Western Washington will get funded and 2.5 organizations in Eastern Washington will get funded. And that's like kind of a metric that you can use for determining whether or not a grant is worthwhile for you to apply for.
That's such good information, Heather. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I think it's really helpful. This is something that I have definitely seen a lot, from my end as well. Recently I had a client from King County that had applied for a grant and got declined for that grant. And so we attended the debriefing conference afterwards, and basically they said, this was a really strong application. We really liked it. You scored as high or higher than other applicants, in all of the areas. But because for that particular grant, their goal was, or not, their goal, but a goal that they had to meet, not just a goal, their stipulation, I guess, was to provide 60% of the funding had to be outside of King County. And so because the client that I worked with was inside King County, essentially, even though they scored higher than, some applicants that were in other parts of the state, they ended up getting declined for the grant because the funder had that geographic priority area. And so, yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, Heather. I think that, yeah, it's super, super important. And these are things that you can know ahead of time. So when you're thinking about applying for a grant, look at the RFP, the document that tells you everything about the grant. And so check and see, you might have to like kind of read all the information in the fine print a little bit, but it should be in there if they're doing some sort of geographic distribution. Is that true, Heather, that it is
Yeah,
typically used?
sometimes it will, and sometimes it's helpful to reach out directly to the funder. So a lot of grants, when they are released, they will have like an FAQ period, or a lot of funders will host like a session. They'll have like an open office hour. They will do a webinar. They will do like a couple of things to roll out the funding solicitation. And it's really in your like sort of best interest to attend those when you can. And in my experience in those spaces, like no question is a bad question. There are folks who are showing up who are experienced grant writers, and folks who are showing up who've never written a grant before. And Ariana, I think you were like spot on in your example. That is that is like an exact thing that I have seen, I've witnessed. If, King County and Pierce County can be really competitive, you could score, if you score a 95, but the priority area is to serve, the entire state, and somebody in Eastern Washington only scored an 80, you might have had the better grant application. You might have had, you had a stronger grant application, but if the priority is predetermined and announced, that is going to be the thing that takes precedence. So this is also something we have on another slide, but I think that's like a really good personal lesson to take with this, is to do your best. Everybody struggles with this, but to try to not take rejection personally. I know that grant writing it is a labor intensive, it is hard work. And sometimes you do have a really, really strong application, and it comes down to just a hard choice. And you should still be encouraged to keep applying. I've also worked with lots of organizations who didn't get funded the first time, they didn't get funded the second time, and then they got fully funded the third time. So if you're not seeing the results you want, I would say to just like take a step back, attend the feedback sessions, and see kind of like how you can, shift a little. But I would just really encourage you to keep going.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. That's really great advice as well. And I think that a thread that I kind of want to pull out of all this a little bit is to reiterate this point of asking questions. As Heather was just saying, attend the technical assistance sessions, attend office hours, attend debriefings, attend pre-proposal conferences, sort of any context in which the funder invites you in to ask questions and to talk with them. That's such a great opportunity, and it's can give you more insight into how the grant process is structured and how to make your application stronger. So I just want to kind of pull out that thread and amplify it a little bit to just remind you to use the resources that are available and to always ask questions. Let's see. I think we have a hand up. Kate, go for it. What would you like to ask? And I think you're still on mute, just FYI.
Okay, I apologize. I'm on my phone and I do not like to use the phone version. I just can't navigate it very smoothly. So my question is, how do you go about public disclosure? For instance, I'll give you two examples. One of them being that we asked in the webinar, this is a commerce thing. We asked in the webinar, hey, are these low barrier grants, high barrier grants? I mean, like, what is the type of process are we looking at? Especially when you're talking about, hey, we're trying to help organizations get off the ground. Now, when we asked who was on the advisory panel, we were told that that information, you know, we wouldn't be able to have that information. But of course, they didn't say, hey, you can get that through public disclosure. What are the best practices of gaining information so you can have a little bit more informed decision making in that respect?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on this, but I do want to say before I start that I don't work at Commerce anymore. And so they are not my employer and I am not making
Oh no, it's okay. I just wanted
commentary.
to give you a reference
Yeah.
of like
No,
what's happening in the landscape right now.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of people are applying for this $200 million situation. So we're getting a lot of I've applied for other things in commerce before,
Mhm.
and I didn't have as hard of a time as I'm having with this.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, this is kind of like what you kind of get taken aback. And so I was thinking, you know, getting that information that could kind of help me navigate better is public disclosure. And what are the best practices on that?
So the best, what I would encourage you to do is there is usually, if specifically for questions related to public disclosure, there is usually like a legal office at each state agency, and they can best answer your questions regarding like specific rules about public disclosure. But what I would say is like, it kind of depends in the funding process of like when you're asking for this information. So if you're like, a lot of times as a grant reviewer, like you're putting together this body of work and you don't have that information. So like I might have been rolling out the grant, like, okay, I've written the proposal. Now I'm going to push the proposal out into the community. I know what day it's due and I know the 2-week period that I need reviewers. So but I might not know who those reviewers are yet. And I might not know how many reviewers I need because I don't know how many applications I'm going to get. So if I don't have, like, if I didn't require a letter of intent to apply, then I, as the like application coordinator, I don't know how many applications I'm going to get, and I don't know how many reviewers I'm going to need. So if you're asking this information beforehand, they might not be able to give it to you because they just might not know yet.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but if you feel though, like if you're in a feedback session though, and you feel like you're getting feedback that is not, that seems problematic, or that seems like it misunderstood your community, or like it's not, you know, it seems like particularly harsh or something like that, and you have like concern about the way that you were scored, then I think it might be worthwhile, you know, you're kind of doing it after the fact, right? After the funding has, like, you've gotten feedback that you didn't receive the funding. But if you feel that way, I think it could be worth it then to request a public disclosure request to see who the evaluators were. And I would also just encourage you to offer that feedback. One of the things that I've learned, like, again, I don't work at Commerce. I don't speak for Commerce.
Right.
But when I was there, what my experience of like working with colleagues and with different departments was that I would say the vast, vast majority of people really care and are heavily invested in the work that they're doing and supporting in community. So if you have a negative experience, applying for a grant, I would encourage you to share that.
Okay.
I would encourage you to tell them that. And I would encourage you to like say the hard thing. Say the hard thing. Tell them, I feel like you misunderstood my community. I feel like this is biased. I feel like you know, And
right.
I think, I mean, you can Google Commerce and you can look on their website, but like they have a strong equity commitment. They have a strong
Yeah.
commitment to equity. They have a strong commitment to diversity. And the thing I'm really proud of in my time at that agency is that I have like seen them do things over time to like walk out that commitment. And I would
Right.
just encourage you to share that feedback. And this is true for like all funders, not just commerce, but like if a funder is saying that this is their value, and then in practice, they're not like walking it out, or they're doing something that is in opposition to their values, I would encourage, like, I know it can be scary and you can be concerned about retaliation or like concerned that you're not going to get funded again in the future if you like shake the ladder too high. But my experience is that grant writers, grant reviewers, they want the feedback. They want to do better. And so I would encourage you to share that to the extent that you're comfortable.
And then the last part to this is, okay, so once one of the grants that I had applied for, and I remember hearing that saying, hey, you might not have got it the first time, didn't get it the second time, but that third time might be the charm. Now, how do you go about, not, I don't know if go about is the right way. Let me think.
Okay.
How do you respond to seeing the same people get the grant? Like, okay, I'll just give you the example because I like to be honest about things and I'm very transparent. So Pierce County Arts Commission, the Pierce County, they have that little art thing that the art grant that they come out with every year. From what I've seen, it's been the same 4 or 5 organizations for the last 3 to 4 years. They might have 1 or 2 changed out, and I'm thinking to myself, well, why don't you just put those organizations under contract and then let some new organizations come in with that funding?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that I've been able to see because I look at the past awardees. I like to see, okay, who are they kind of awarding? What's the feel? What's the vibe? And when I seen, the last 4 years, it's the same people. I was like, oh, well, this doesn't even look like I'm going to even be able to get it because I'm not that organization. And it doesn't matter how strong my application is.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the type of funding application that you're applying for. So like there are some types of grants, there are lots of different types of grants. The majority of grants I think are time bound. So like, okay, you have this much funding to do this thing and you have to spend all this money by December of 2025. Other grants, some grants are competitive, which I think is like the majority of grants that people apply for. Like everybody's kind of competing against each other for money. But sometimes there are funding sources that are formula funded. Like sometimes there are grants that are for specific types of programs that have a specific type of entity status or a specific type of service. And so if you're seeing this kind of like constantly, again, I'd encourage you to call it out. And I would just encourage you to ask, like, I would encourage you to ask the grant reviewer, like, or ask the application coordinator, say like, hey, I'm noticing this pattern. Is there something I'm missing here? And see what they tell you.
Okay.
I would also encourage you to reach out to like one of the organizations that keeps getting funded. I'd ask them, call them.
Well, I can tell what they are. They're all kind of like more state sponsored or they're county sponsored. So I seen a pattern in it. It was like, there's no way that I could compete. So why are you telling me that I'm eligible? That kind of thing. They're like, oh, all organizations bring it in. And then it's like you apply for it and it's like, oh, the Kitsap County thing, and it's like, okay, cool, I see that. But they've been getting 4 years in a row, put them under contract.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to stop doing their program and there's no way I'm going to be able to compete. So why are you even telling me I'm eligible? Just make it for them. Make something that's for them. Yep. So that's kind of where like that would be the conversation I would have in a very, cordial manner.
Yeah. And I think that's an okay question to have. And I think Ariana on the next slide, I think Ariana and I kind of get into this a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too, Heather. As Heather has done such a great job explaining all this stuff to us, one of the points she's been making is how different every application is. And so it might be that, this particular one you're looking at that keeps funding the same organizations over and over might just be something that you need to pass over, so this is in another one of our slides. But yeah, so it's, something that you can do to kind of help determine what grants are worth your time to apply for is do this research and look at, is the funder funding the same organizations every year and maybe only one new org? If that keeps happening, it's probably not going to be worth your time to apply. And I totally agree with Heather. Like, yeah, it does seem kind of unfair. So like, yeah, talking about it, could maybe make a change in the process. But without doing that, without talking about it, I think that my advice would be probably that's just not a great use of your time or energy, because yeah, it's probably unlikely that you're going to get funded as you've noticed. So yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind as well. Thank you for those questions, Kay. That was really great. I hope that, yeah, I think that was a lot of good informative stuff that was able to bring out. I think I see a question from Malcolm as well.
I have a question, and you can go to the next slide too. This is just more of a generalist question. For those who are just starting out in the grant writing space, given your history of evaluation, do you recommend having, like universally for all the grants, do you recommend having a stronger vision, missions, values versus evaluation versus the deliverable? What is one area that you feel like should be universally strong to give you a good foundation for applying for a grant?
Okay. Ariana, I think this is a great moment to go to the next slide, and then we can we're getting great questions. So I think we can come here. So these are some of my like best, most practical starting point tips. So Ariana was kind of just talking about this, but like, I know the funding landscape is hard. I know folks are applying for grants is not something that folks take on lightly. And the work that all organizations are doing is critical. Everybody feels that way about their work. Like that's the baseline. And one of the most frequent things that I would see as a grant reviewer is folks just applying for whatever they can apply for. Like if they're eligible, they're going to, submit an application. And what this would result in is you have your book of services is a square. My grant is a circle. And you are trying to fit your square book of services into a round grant application. And it's getting distorted as you're trying to like change your programming to just fit a funding thing. And Kay, I think like some of your questions are really bringing this out is like, you're absolutely right. That is a thing that I have witnessed, I have experienced where there's a difference between being eligible and being competitive, right? To apply for a funding source. And there are grants where that they just kind of keep funding the same, 5 mega organizations who obviously have grant writers who have been getting funded for the last 20 years, right? And that is why I would encourage you to be selective about the grants that you apply for, because your energy is precious. You are a valuable resource. And if you are just throwing spaghetti at the wall, trying to get whatever grant you can, oh, I think I'm eligible for this. Oh, this sounds like a thing I maybe want to do. You're likely going to burn yourself out. So I would encourage you to be selective about the grants that you apply for. And a big part of that is taking the time to read the grant application requirements completely. Ariana and I just had this experience a couple of weeks ago where Ariana was like, hey, do you think this is a good grant that we could apply for? And I was like, no, because of all of these, the grant is a small amount of money and comes with a high administrative burden of like, you have to report data in a very specific certain way. This pot is like extremely competitive. The juice is not worth the squeeze here. It is not worth the headache of applying for this pot of money. And, you know, that is something that a lot of the times the RFP, the actual application will tell you. It will kind of, as you're reading through it, and the more you do it, the more applications you read, the more you'll kind of like build experience between knowing what does a good application look like, what does a good RFP look like, and what is an unclear RFP look like. What's something that looks flexible, right? Versus something that is, you know, oh, this is this has rigid, strict requirements. If you as an organization have a high value around equity and inclusion and diversity, look in the RFP to see if your values are reflected by the funder. And if they're not, if you don't see any like keywords or like, as you were saying, like words from your mission, vision, and values, if none of the words are the same between your mission, vision, and values and the grant application, maybe just like take a beat and see if that is really something that is like something that you want to be aligned with. A lot of the times when you get into a relationship with a funder, you're getting into it for a long haul. That's how, like those organizations, you know, end up being funded for 15 years, right? Like
Exactly.
when you get in the door, you are starting a long-term relationship with an organization. And so when you're picking a funder that you want to get money from, make sure that they are actually a funder that you want to be aligned with. Like, look at their website. Look at the RFP. Go look at their website. Look at the organizations that they have funded in the past. Ask for help and take advantage of technical assistance. And if those don't exist, if they are not available, if they are not offered, what does that tell you about the organization that you are asking for money from?
But we don't really have very many options. I mean, we got Pierce County, we got Tacoma Creates, as far as for arts education funding. And then when I tried to apply I worked at the rescue mission. So I worked at community engagement. So when I seen what a $7 million nonprofit looked on paper, that's what had me motivated. I kind of already seen some of the answers to the test. So then I was able to say, okay, this is what, $300,000 grant application looks like. Okay, this is what you have to have. So even applying for some of that, I didn't have all my audit stuff or whatever. But when I talked to them, I gave them an idea of what I could do, and they were like, "We need a Zoom meeting with you." And then when they found out, they're like, "Oh no, she's broke," and then not like, but no, I don't mean to sound like that. I'm being very candid and casual with my conversation, but basically, just kind of getting that like taste of it, and it was just like, okay, helped me know that I needed to get myself, together even more, and what would that look like? But yeah, there was no technical assistance. I had to go get my technical assistance in King County. I had to expand from Pierce County because there was no options. This community partners initiative is amazing, and I just want to say thank you guys for having this programming, because I'm very tapped in. I am not going anywhere.
Oh, good. I'm so
glad
to hear it. I'm so glad to hear it.
Sum it up. Yeah, just to sum it up, I was just kind of like, well, the landscape is kind of really tough.
Rough.
And trying to, go from state grants, county grants, city grants, the reporting. Yes, the reporting. Yes. But my state, Washington State ones are not even as bad as my city ones or my county.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that speaks to like, sometimes I am really proud of the time that I spent working for the state, because like, again, I felt like I was working at an organization that was practicing our values. And like, sometimes there's all different levels of like funding organizations. So like sometimes the funder is a rich foundation of wealthy people who are like distributing money to communities, right? Like they're not going to have the same, or they're unlikely to have, no, don't let me say they're not going to have, but they're unlikely to have the same type of like strict requirements, like the same, like, because they're not bound by the same like federal regulations or state regulations or county provisions as like some of the other grants. And Ariana and I talked about this a little bit, but I think this is where like really do the math for, in most like competitive solicitations, it will say this much money is available. This much money is how much you can apply for. And if you divide those numbers, it will tell you about how many organizations can get funded. And you can, kind of like, you're kind of like piecing a puzzle together where you're like, okay, if there's 10, let me look at this. Like there's 10 organizations who can get, a grant of $100,000 because there's $1 million in this pot, right? Every year they've funded the same 8 organizations and 2 new organizations. And they have a statewide goal, like their goal is to cover the whole state. So let's assume that means they're going to fund half of the programs in Western Washington and half of the programs in Eastern Washington. That means that there's only going to be 1 new program in Western Washington and like maybe 1 new program in Eastern Washington. This is not an exact math. This is not, like that's not ever how it like shakes out, but it can give you like a rough framework of like kind of the state of how competitive like an application is going to be. The other thing I would say is like what is true today will not be true in 2 years. So when I started my work as a grant reviewer and a grant administrator, I was starting at a time when there had been a huge, I'm talking like a doubling of funding available for victim services, a massive increase. So like over time, over history, what had happened was this pot of funding that was available from the federal government, it had been like low. It had been very, very low. In like 2015 to 2018, there was a massive spike. The pot more than doubled. We had to like push money out the door. So this climate of like everybody had been operating in scarcity, like applications were extremely competitive. All of a sudden the climate had changed and it was like everybody who was applying was getting what they were asking for because our pot of funding had shifted. And now the climate was not, okay, how do we carefully balance this? It was, how do we be strategic? And also, how do we make sure that we don't return money to the federal government? We got to get this out into our communities. Now, and like over time, so 3 years of like high pots of funding happened. And then guess what? The pot went back down. And so now grants that were competitive or that like were really, or grants that were like easy to get, grants that were not so competitive, grants that were like, oh, I didn't try that hard the first time and I got it, but now all of a sudden this year I didn't get this funding. It's because the pot shrunk. And so like the experience that you're talking about right now where like funding can be really hard or the resources are really limited, that might not be true in 5 years. It might not be true in 2 years. So it's kind of this like constant evaluation that you have to do. And a lot of times a lot of applicants that I would see think that they can phone it in. Like, oh, I got this application last year, so let me just like, change the year, resubmit. If I've worked with you for a while, I know that you're doing that. If I like, again, when you're getting into a relationship with a funder, a lot of times it's a long-term relationship. And so if you are, maybe you, and I like, Kay, to your point, I have also seen the other side of the coin that you're talking about, where an organization has been funded for 10, 15 years, and then they're not funded in the 16th year. So, you could be, you've been getting funded pretty consistently and you're, kind of phoning it in and you're just sending in the same application. And then guess what? 1 year, the application is going to be a little bit different and you're not going to have answered the question like at the same quality if you keep just recycling applications and like not being intentional about how you're responding to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. That's all really awesome. And yeah, I want to kind of bounce back a bit to Malcolm's question that he had asked when we started the slide. So I think the kind of threads that I want to pull out here is that this is such great advice, Heather, that as the sort of first step, before you even think about how to make your application strong, just driving home the point that the first step here is really, making sure that you're doing the right application. And so this is really good advice, Heather. I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us. I think that maybe something that would be great to talk about next, I think we might run out of time to get through all of our slides, which is
That
great
too. I
because
think that too.
yeah. I'm thinking maybe what would be great to talk about next is kind of also to speak a bit to Malcolm's point about how to strengthen your application. Let's see
Yes.
which slide. Okay, so yeah, we've got some stuff about budgets if we have time to get back to here. But yeah, I think if it's okay, Heather, let's
Yeah.
go here. So I think this kind of question about what do you look for when reviewing a grant narrative, like what does make that grant narrative really strong? I think this could be a really great place to go to next and kind of
Yeah.
talk through.
Yeah, so I think something that I would see really frequently in both, primarily in unsuccessful applications, is sort of this, when you are writing a cover letter or like you're doing like a resume, you're like filling out a resume. Now the thing is to do the keyword search or like the keyword match of like, okay, what keywords are in the job application, and I'm going to add those to my cover letter, or what are the keywords in my what are the keywords in this application and how do I put them in my resume, right? How do I like align those two things? And a lot of the times I see people take that same approach with grant writing, but you are just repeating the word in the application and you're not telling me what it means to you. So like if I say, okay, this grant is to provide domestic violence advocacy services. And you write me an application and you say, my organization does advocacy. We've done advocacy for 10 years. We think we should get funded. We're a strong organization because we do advocacy. But you don't tell me how you do advocacy, or you don't tell me what your advocacy looks like. I can't evaluate what you're proposing to me. So be specific and explain exactly what you mean. Assume the grant writer knows nothing about you. And that's kind of like that's a best practice. That's always going to help you. Assume that they don't know your field. They don't know about your community. They don't know about like the barriers that you're experiencing. And so you need to it's really like spoon feeding them as to why, like, here is the thing I do. Here is the issue I am facing. Here's why I need this money. And here is my plan to use it. Be specific. The word because is your friend. I am applying for, like, I think that I don't know where this rule comes from, but there's a lot of people who think that you shouldn't use because to start a sentence. As a grant reviewer, I'm telling you that because is your friend. I do this work because blank. I am applying for this funding because blank. I would be good at receiving this funding. I would implement this funding well because blank. Because is your friend. You want to explain things carefully. You also want to tell folks, I kind of touched on this a little bit, but you want to explain like what a lot of applications have, like buzzwords. They have a lot of buzzwords, or like a lot of times I'll see funding applications come out that are, related to, things that are like happening in the news, or things that are, like really in pop culture, and explain exactly what your service is, or what your book of business, explain what it looks like in practice. Give and use examples. Talk about like things that you have done before, talk about things that have been successful, talk about lessons that you've learned. If the narrative question, if this is something else that I see is like, sometimes when you're writing, folks will just go like stream of consciousness, and they'll try to give you all the information, right? And in doing that, sometimes folks really forget the simplest of things, which is like, answer the question. make sure you answered the question. If the question is, tell me about your primary prevention activities, and you just start talking to me about how important you write a whole application about the importance of primary prevention, you still haven't told me how, I don't need to be persuaded necessarily that your work is important, but I do need to know what your work is going to look like.
Yeah, I think this is such a great piece of advice. And yeah, I think this is helpful, for every part of the grant application, whether you're writing about your values, the work that you do, each part of your application, apply this advice. I did put a slide in here, I think, about yeah, so I put an example in here so you can kind of, look at this
Great.
when you slide deck afterwards. So, like an example might be our tutoring improves academic performance. And I see this all the time as well when I'm working with clients. They people will write sentences like this, that, what they do does X. But when I read the sentence, I think, okay, but how, why? So think about because, also think about like how and why. So, to revise this, you might say instead, like our program provides one-on-one tutoring services to at-risk youth ages 10 through 18 and math and reading for 2 hours after school, 4 days a week. And this has led to a 20% increase in grade point averages among participants. So, it's concrete. It shows how you have improved, how has the academic performance improved? It's improved by 20%. And, what does your tutoring look like? Like, what does that tutoring look like in practice? 2 hours after school, 4 days a week. And, this is a really short, pithy example for the purposes of this presentation. Obviously, you would expand more on this. But yeah, so think about this, think about these words, because, why, and how. And I think we won't have time quite to do this because I want us to go back and talk about our other slide, but I did put a little exercise in here. So this is something, you can work on at home when you get the slide deck afterwards. So I put an example in here. And so you can kind of think through ways of how you might reframe this example to make it stronger, thinking about those words that are your friend, because, how, and why. So yeah, thank you so much, Heather, for that advice. So I think maybe let's go back here. Let's see. Is this where I want to be? Okay, sorry for flipping around in the slide deck here. But I think it would be good maybe to use a bit of our time that's left is like to think about the budget. So Heather, I'm curious, from your perspective as a grant reviewer, how much does the budget sort of factor into the grant review? Is it important? Like, what are some things that folks could do to maybe make their budgets stronger when they're submitting their grants?
Yeah, so I think the most common, I see a lot of common pitfalls around budget, I think, but like budget can sometimes be the scariest part of writing a grant application. And there are sort of a lot of things that you can do to sort of improve this particular section of your grant application. The first thing that I would recommend that you do is that you look at the application. I cannot stress this enough. Check the application, check the application, check the application, check the application. If you take nothing away from this, like from this talk that we're having today, check the application. And I say that because different grants will score your budget differently. So a lot of the grants that I worked on, if the available score is 100, the budget piece is only worth 10 points. So is it really that means you're going to get the majority of your points, 90% of your points are going to come from somewhere else. So is it really worth it to get wrapped around the axle about the budget? Something that was a really common pitfall that I would see with a lot of unsuccessful organization is proposing to go to the moon with $10,000. Instead of proposing to do, every single thing. A lot of times when you get an RFP, there will be like a list of, okay, these are your eligible activities. This is what we're going to fund with these dollars. And a lot of times what I'll see folks do is they will write a grant that says, okay, we're going to do all of these things. We're going to provide every available eligible service under the sun, and we're going to do it with $50,000 for 2 years. Be realistic, be a little bit realistic, a little bit grounded. And I think it is, in my experience, it is better to pick a few things that you can do extremely well, that you excel at, that you have expertise in, where you are very knowledgeable. Pick a few things and do it really, really well, rather than trying to do everything. When I see this a lot, I think one of the things that comes up is that I, as a grant reviewer, and I know a lot of my grant reviewer friends who have done this work for a long time, that we consider is like, okay, is your budget in line with your values? So if you are writing an application about how much you value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you're doing work in BIPOC and disenfranchised communities, and you don't pay your staff a living wage, maybe that is something to reconsider. Or maybe you should reconsider how you have structured your budget. I think sometimes, and I think it's better I have worked with a lot of organizations who I think are scared of asking for money, who are scared to ask for money. Between asking for too little and asking for too much, I think I would lean to like, ask for what you need. Ask for what you need. Don't try to you're not writing a bid. You're not trying to be the lowest bidder, right? Like that's not how grants work. It's not like, you might hire like a contractor for your house and you're, reviewing all of the different bids that you get. And maybe you're going to go with the lowest bidder. Grants don't work that same way. So I've never seen someone score points for proposing to overextend themselves outside of their budget. So I think the budget tends to be a way it's really easy to pick up. It's a really easy way to pick up points, and it's also a really easy way to lose them. And the fastest way that I have seen folks lose points is to not be complete. So if you write me an application that says you're going to host 5 support groups a month, and then you give me a budget and your budget doesn't have anything showing that you're going to provide 5 support groups, you're not buying any support group supplies, you don't need snacks, what are you going to do in the support group? Are you guys going to do crafts? I don't know. So make sure your budget matches your narrative. What I would recommend you do is you have your budget at the end. I would recommend you write your narrative. That is usually, for most of the applications I have reviewed, the narrative is where that's the meat and potatoes of the grant application. That is where you are going to come across the strongest. That's where you're going to get to tell your story. So I would recommend that you almost work backwards a little bit. To some extent, you kind of have to have a big picture, thought at the front end of okay, how are we going to use this money? What do we want this money for? What are we going to use it for? But I would kind of have a rough outline of your budget at the beginning, write your narrative, and then at the end, make sure your budget matches your narrative, what you wrote. And I think that's the completeness is really, really I think the highest priority, at least for me when I was reviewing grants.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather. I agree. As a grant writer, that is my process. I will do the narrative first and then do the budget, or at least do the bulk of the narrative first and then go to work on the budget. And yeah, that piece about making sure that they match up is super important. I've seen this when I am working with folks who have a grant application they've written and then they have me review it. Sometimes it's confusing, as not that I'm a grant reviewer, but as a grant writer who sometimes just assists clients by looking at their grants and helping them with it. I saw this recently and I was super confused because in the narrative, they were talking about these new staff members that they were going to use for this program, but then I didn't see the staff salaries in the budget. And so I was really confused and I was like, well, are these staff members not being hired with this grant, but yet they seem to be working on this grant? And so, yeah, it really leads to a lot of confusion. And so I think, yeah.
I thought of something else too, is like, the other thing that I'm looking for in the budget is like, I'm looking to see that you put a little bit of thought into it, right? So if you write me a grant application about how you're going to expand services and you tell me that you need, that your staff has this, skill set A, but you need them to start providing skill set B, and you don't provide in the budget any training, you need to train them. You need to include like some of the costs that are associated with getting to where you're trying to go. So if you're, especially this is true if you're applying for a grant that's like capacity building or to like expand your services, make sure that you're including funds to get you to where you're trying to go.